Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me back. Again, my name is Scott Elbert. I'm a workforce consultant in the Pittsburgh area, and I'm back for part two of Green Careers. If you remember, a couple of Thursdays ago, we were talking about green careers as they've kind of related to the development of different lighting systems and heating and air conditioning systems. We also talked about green careers from the perspective of kind of this trend towards community gardens, and kind of going back to a naturalistic kind of growing your own vegetables, that sort of thing, and the whole agricultural aspect that comes out of those. Today I want to talk a little bit with you about specifically how green careers connect to the world of energy, and there are a number of different areas we can go with this, but I'm going to use the Marcellus Shale industry as kind of a model of sort of what happens in the energy industry when a producer of energy finds a new way to extract a resource, or to condense solar power through solar panels and the work that's related to that. So our focus is going to be on Marcellus Shale. A couple of things I'll talk about. We're going to go just kind of through a quick history of what Marcellus Shale is and kind of what that all means. I'm going to give you some background on just the technology of drilling for natural gas, because I think that both of those are important for one reason only, for our conversation at least, is to understand the type of work that goes on from an exploration process of discovering a resource in the earth to the science of extracting that resource, and then ultimately the distribution of that resource that happens on the back end. So what we'll do is I'll go through a brief history, I'll go through some of the science and technology, then I'm going to talk specifically to the types of occupations that are tied to each phase of the drilling and extraction process. As we go through, any questions that you have for me, please, feel free to chime in with those. Again, this is kind of an open dialogue. If you want to hold questions to the end, that's fine, but you're more than welcome to submit those as we go through the presentation today. So I guess first and foremost, the question becomes, what is Marcellus Shale? And essentially, Marcellus Shale is a shale formation. It's a rock formation under the earth that really spans through large part of West Virginia, across western Pennsylvania, up into southeast New York, or southwest New York, comes down into parts of southeast Ohio. And from this shale formation, we're able to extract resource, natural gas, through a process that's called fracking, which I'll describe in a few moments. And the shale formation itself is kind of interesting because, it's some points up near the New York region, the shale is actually exposed at ground level, and then at other areas where you're talking about a shale rock that's more than a mile below the earth, and obviously it's into those depths that gas companies are drilling to extract natural gas. Some of the leaders in this industry that we see in this process right now, some of you may be familiar with Range Resources. I'm sure you've heard the name Chevron. Consol Energy is another local energy company that's in the shale game, if you would. But they're, as we speak, drilling at different locations. They're fracturing the shale beneath the earth. They're extracting the natural gas that's released as a part of that fracking process, and they're distributing that into the communities. Good example of where natural gas is used. I just came this morning from a transportation company in Pittsburgh. Taxi cabs and access vans. They run in limousine service. About 65% of their fleet is currently running on what they call compressed natural gas, which is the natural gas that we're talking about today that will be extracted from the shale formation. So again, if you kind of just picture in your mind a map of PA and Ohio and then West Virginia coming up in between them, we're really talking about a formation of shale, of rock that kind of spans across those states, almost like a wave, all the way up into New York. So it's a wide area. It's an active area for drilling. So the discovery of this shale formation kind of came along at a time where the technology of drilling was really changing in the gas and oil industry. In the 1990s, we started to see companies go from what wasn't once known as vertical drilling to a process known as horizontal drilling. And basically what that means is this. If you could picture in your minds for a moment, maybe a field in a farm, There's a big grassy field, and within that field, a farmer's going to lease to a natural gas company a portion of that land to come in and drill for gas extraction, be it natural gas or whatever the case may be. In the past, the drilling company would come on and they might drill one well straight down, what they call a vertical well, which basically runs one line down into the earth to access and extract the resource, in this case, gas. In cases where there was a large land mass, a company might come in and they would have to drill multiple vertical wells. So you would take a couple of mile area, and from an aerial view, you would look down and see maybe 8, 10, 15 wells on one piece of land. Each one of those running a single vertical line down about a mile into the earth to extract natural gas or oil or whatever the case may be. What horizontal drilling allows these companies to do is to go into that same 1 to 2 mile area, draw one wellhead with multiple lines. So what we're talking about here in this process, and the process that's being used specifically on this Marcellus Shale formation, you kind of have to picture almost a pitchfork going into the earth. And the prongs of that pitchfork would go down into the earth, and the stem of it would stay sticking up, but those prongs would go down and out into different directions. They would spread out like the fingers of your hand. And each of those prong pitchfork are really lines that are running into the shale formation, into the stone, to extract gas from multiple areas within a 2, 3, 4 mile radius. So what that really allows for is one wellhead with multiple lines, as opposed to multiple wellheads over one geographic area as it was done in the past. So the technology has allowed these the producers of this resource, the Consols and Chevrons of the world, to access and extract a natural resource like natural gas. And in doing so, the process is designed to be less intrusive to the land, to the environment, to the kind of the trees and the grass and the hillsides and everything that's growing around it. So you end up with this one wellhead with multiple lines kind of going down into the earth. So sort of what you would have to picture, I suppose, and I may have an image that I can hold up and show you. We'll see how this works out. Is in the past, you ended up with a piece of property that would look something like this. Now I'm going to hold this picture up. This is a picture from western Wyoming of a landmass that's known as Jonas Field, and you can see multiple wellheads in this image. All the little spots are single wells that have been drilled vertically down into the earth. Now let me back up for a moment. Oops, may have backed up too far. And I'll show you kind of a side-by-side comparison of what horizontal drilling allows for as opposed to the vertical well process. So this one, if you can see our first image with all the red dots on it, that's a picture of what vertical wells would look like on somebody's property. The one below it that has the landmass cut out from underneath the grass has a single wellhead on it that's running horizontal lines under the earth. It's those horizontal lines that we're talking about as part of the horizontal drilling process. So again, just in terms of visual, hopefully that helps to create a picture a little bit of what these vertical wells look like. It allows for a couple of things. It allows for an active well to look like this. So again, you can see the picture of the land above the earth. There are a couple of well sites here, but the activity of that well and the multiple lines are running a mile below the earth as opposed to running at individual spots. And I think just one more that I'm going to try to show you here. The concept is that at the end of the day, there's going to be a construction crew that comes on to a piece of land, whether it be somebody's farm property or a public space or whatever. That construction crew is going to tear apart that region. They're going to drill a wellhead. That wellhead's going to go a mile down into the earth, and we'll talk about in a moment what that process looks like. And ultimately that well is going to be established for production and it's going to extract gas on a regular basis. It's going to produce the resource on a regular basis. But at the end of the entire construction process of putting up that rig, drilling into the earth, building that wellhead, the idea is that you should end up with a picture that looks like this. So if you can kind of see this image, it almost looks like somebody's garage parked back there in the corner of this land, and the grass is regrown around it and trees are planted around it. What you see there in that image, that garage space, that's the wellhead that's left on the property at the end of the process. So the idea essentially is, if a Chevron comes and they knock on somebody's door and they say, hey, we'd like to explore the area for gas, and they do in fact find access to the resource through somebody's property, they're going to lease that property, and part of that lease agreement is going to require that they leave the property as close to the way as they found it when they showed up originally to drill. Because again, the understanding is that once that property is leased, for a while, just like a road construction or construction in your town where new buildings are going up, that property is going to be torn apart for a long period of time. But at the end of the day, it should be put back together and look like the picture that I just shown you of the wellhead sitting there, roughly the size of a 1 to 2 car garage, and the land itself kind of what they call reclamated, the reclamation of the land put back together around it. So again, for our conversation, that leads to some interesting topics. The whole process of identifying where that resource is, the whole leasing process and coming to some agreement with the landowner, the drilling and the construction process for putting up that rig, getting down into the earth and what happens there, and then kind of the post-drilling activity of the land reclamation, the environmental work that has to go into cleaning up the site, and then obviously kind of the landscape and the landscape architectural work that needs to go into putting that site back together so that it ends up to be as close as it was to the way the producer found it originally. So I think hopefully as we go through this process, you'll learn a couple of things. You'll learn about the type of career opportunities that exist for people at each level: pre-drilling, drilling, and then what we call the production phase once the well is set up and producing its resource. I think you'll also learn too, and this might be surprising to a number of people listening in or that view this presentation, but when we hear names like Chevron and we hear names like Range Resources or Consol Energy, the natural assumption is that those companies are the companies that are hiring people to do all this work that we're describing, from the pre-drilling to the drilling to the production phase. When in reality, that's not true. 90 to 95% of the employees that would be on a well site are not going to work for Chevron or Consol Energy or Range Resources or any of the energy producers. They're going to be working for contractors who perform very specific tasks at each step or at each phase of the process, from pre-drilling to drilling to production. So that's kind of just our setup. So let's talk a little bit about what goes on in the pre-drilling phase. And I have in front of me a list of different occupations and just kind of different areas of work that take place during that pre-drilling phase. And you almost would have to imagine this, I think, involving two main areas: the exploration to discover the resource, and then ultimately the, for lack of a better description, the sales pitch that's involved between the energy producer, the Chevron of the world, and the landowner, and the negotiation of a lease to in fact access that resource through somebody's property, because most of the property, being privately owned, that sort of thing. So you're talking about a lot of work in the area of geology. Most of the work that takes place on the front end of this, probably more scientific and technical by nature. You're talking about petroleum engineers and chemists and hydrogeologists and folks that would explore that land regions, folks that would explore that area of the Marcellus shale play, as they call it, to determine whether or not there is in fact access to the resource. There's also the whole public land issue that goes on here. There's some things around, forestry and just kind of licensing, people that are involved in a permitting process once a lease agreement is reached. So you're talking about environmental technicians, you're talking about the attorneys involved in this. There's an opportunity for what they call permitting technicians. So people that negotiate that lease, secure the permits to go in and develop what essentially is a construction site at that particular location to drill. Then there's the whole contracting of services for staking off the roads, in some cases designing road access in. I think one of the things that needs to be understood about this is that a lot of these well sites are in remote locations. So there isn't necessarily road access. There isn't a highway that's just, it can't come down 376 or I-79 straight to a well site. They're pretty remote, and in some cases roads have to be designed and then eventually plowed and built to gain access to these locations where they're drilling. So you kind of have that whole process going on, and then the establishment folks that are going to take care of some of the wastewater, just the waste in general. You're talking about companies like Waste Management being contracted for this, some of the environmental technician companies. There's a big one here in the Pittsburgh area. It's called Weavertown Environmental. They do a lot of the work in this front end area. And then even things just like you would traditionally see on a construction site. Somebody's got to secure like the porta potty companies and food service companies and things of that nature that are going to provide some additional service to that site. So pre-drilling really is about exploration. It's about approaching landowners once a discovery of that resource has been made, negotiating the lease. It's about permitting and taking care of all the legalities related to setting up that construction, that drilling site, and then starting that process for bringing contractors on board to perform the actual work. Now, most of what's going to take place on that pre-drilling site kind of contradicts what I talked about a few moments ago. The production companies are going to employ most of the people that are going to do the scientific discovery, the permitting, the negotiation, and all the legalities. Those folks are going to be the people that are working for Consol, Chevron, Range, and some of the leaders on the production side. So the production company is going to send out their own people to do title searches, to find out who the landowners are, their own salespeople to knock on doors. I think they call them landmen. I keep calling them salespeople because it's kind of a sale, right? Short of sale. So all those folks are going to work for an energy producer. So that's kind of phase one: exploration, legalities, and setting up the work site before a single tool ever touches the earth. That's kind of what's taking place. So I guess maybe with that, are there any questions so far just about the technology of drilling or what's taking place in the pre-drilling phase? Yeah.
Pass them along.
Yeah, as we kind of move through each section. So if you have questions at this point about the technology, the process, anything that I can't answer, certainly, I'm not. Yes, please.
Are you saying that this would be considered a green career?
What's that?
Is this falling under the category of green?
I think some aspects of it, yes. Mm-hmm.
I was just curious, because why is it invented in New York State and some other countries around the world?
Yeah, there's a whole political debate around this industry, and it really is polarizing, split down the middle. I mean, if you talk to somebody that works in the natural gas industry, they're going to tell you it's perfectly environmentally friendly. If you talk to environmentalists on the other side, they're going to say it's destroying the water supply and destroying the land, and they don't want anything to do with it, causing earthquakes in Southeast Ohio and that sort of thing. I really can't speak to the issue beyond just a vocational point of view. And yeah, what would be considered green from that matter? Does that help? I don't know if that helps or if that's
I was just curious.
Yeah.
How it was green.
Yeah. I think, when we focus on green careers in not only in natural gas, but anything related to it, whether it be oil extraction or whatever the case may be, I think a lot of what we see is protection of water supply, reclamation of the land, the environmental cleanup, and that piece of it, probably classifying more as green than necessarily what I'm describing now, which is the construction phase of it. Because the reality is the construction phase is abrasive. They're going to go in, they're going to tear up a landmass, and they're going to drill a mile down into the earth. That's kind of, it's an abrasive process. So the green aspect of this comes in really with the distribution and the use of the resource on the back end, the reclamation of the land, the cleanup of the environment, that sort of thing. So
yeah, because it will all be relative as opposed to other sources or drilling. Like what would, like, when you talk about green, you say the structure on the land obviously is green, but when you compare that to the what you've done in the past.
oh yeah, because in the past, let's just assume you own a farm in Cecil Township and somebody knocks on your door and says, hey, we're going to give you X amount of dollars for a lease to drill on your land. 30 years ago, they'd come onto your property, and if they had the access to the resource, they might put 15 wellheads across your property and not put it back together anyway it was, or not maybe have the opportunity to put it back together because they've drilled in so many locations. But this process allows for, at least, is a drilling spot in one location and the opportunity to, reclaim that land. Yes, right. To the best degree possible. Yeah. So that's the philosophy behind it. So, good.
Yeah, one thing.
Yes, please.
In regards to just protecting the water that's being used, is the Clean Water Act, does that apply to the drilling? I've heard that been exempt from the Clean Water Act.
That I don't know. I really can't speak to it, to tell you the truth. Yeah. That would be more for somebody in the industry on one side or the other.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So moving from pre-drilling into drilling phase, as we were just discussing a moment ago, this is where I guess the majority of the physical work takes place of building it is a construction site. You're building a rig and then you're drilling into the earth. So what happens here is the drilling takes place, the fracking process takes place. To describe the fracking process best I can, basically there are lines run into the wells. They go into the shale formation, and the use of electricity and explosives, they generate an explosion that fractures the shale formation. When that shale formation is fractured and cracked, the natural gas is released from it. And then typically what happens, until you have a producing well site, the well lines are capped off with cement blocks, and that gas is it's captured at that release point where the shale has been fractured, and the well is essentially capped at that point until it's ready for production and distribution. So you have the drilling process taking place, the fracking process taking place, the whole construction of any kind of pipeline, anything that needs to go into that. Overall, these are some samples of occupations that are taking place during the drilling process. Obviously, heavy equipment operators, CDL drivers, welders, electricians. Again, this whole process is generated through an electric explosive under the earth. Cement work is real big here. When that well line goes down into the earth, it goes about a mile into the shale formation, and there's a water supply below the earth that has to be protected. And this kind of speaks to that whole clean water issue. So part of this process involves not only drilling down, but encasing that well in cement. So a big part of this business is around that casing process. So the whole cement piece of this is extremely important because it's that cement casing around a well that supposedly protects the water supply. So then you have construction managers, you have everything from like general laborers, foremen, and pipe inspectors, additional engineers overseeing the whole process. You have people on the water management side. There's a high pressure solution that's pumped into these well sites. That's kind of a chemical water mix. So you have water companies that are not only pumping that water in, but the extraction of that water and that chemical mix that's being used, that water has to be disposed of properly. So you're seeing the pop-up of disposal centers around the country. Closest to us in PA, one I can think about is Somerset Regional Water Supply. Basically does the water extraction for this industry across the tri-state area, and they have a facility that extracts the chemical compounds from that water and reuses it as clean water, that sort of thing. Overall, a lot of environmental technicians, road crews for access in and out, first aid and security and safety people come into play. We've all seen things on the news already about accidents and fires. It's a dangerous process of drilling. That's one of the things that can't be lost in the conversation. It's not a type of career that's made for everybody. I mean, we're talking about, again, the process of drilling into the earth and extracting a resource and using explosives to access that resource. So there's safety and fire crews that are on site that are specifically trained to respond to fires and accidents on a well site.
Scott, if
Yes.
I was answering the question,
Please.
one of our students had asked right before he started going into it about the dangers of drilling.
Oh, yeah.
So I figured, we already started discussing it, cover it on both sides, like the danger for the workers and the people that are interested in getting into that kind of occupation,
Mhm.
and maybe the dangers to the community and the people that live in the area.
Yeah.
where the-
I could probably speak more to the occupational perspective of it. from the beginning, anybody that goes on a well site has to go through a production company's safety training. So let's just say, for example, that Consol Energy owns a drilling location. They're going to drill on, Jim's farm for natural gas. They're going to fracture the shale. So Consol owns that lease, and they're the producer on that well site. They're going to contract a cement company. They're going to contract a construction company. They're going to contract a drilling company, and so on and so on. All these folks are going to come on to Consol's site as subcontractors. Before any of those people can come onto that site, regardless of who they work for or what type of training they go through, they have to go through Consol's safety training. Every individual that walks onto a well site has to obtain what's called a Safeland USA certification card. It's verification of having been through the safety training, because again, the dangers of drilling are real. It's a tough job. It's long hours. There are crews that are out there working that have been on site, in some cases 7, 10, 14 days at a time for 12, 14-hour days. So fatigue sets in, that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't think that could be sugar-coated. It's not an easy occupation. It's the reason why that a lot of people are making a lot of money in this industry, those that are willing to go out and do it. But the Safeland training, the safety certification, is required by all the producers, and somebody that owns that well site is going to require every contractor's employees to go through that safety training before they ever step onto a site. From the community perspective, that's kind of out of my realm of knowledge. So yeah, I really don't have the response to that.
I think it would be, a lot of the students that live in the Pittsburgh area, I'm sure many of them have been to the Torrid mines, where they kind of take you through the coal mines.
Sure.
And talk about the dangers through the past 100 years, and how technology's evolved and standards have been set, and the job has become safer as time goes on.
Right.
So I'd imagine that with drilling, it's probably a similar process.
Yeah. And I think it's just one of those industries, whether you're talking about working in the mines or drilling on an oil rig, there are going to be accidents. We've seen disasters. We all know what happened with BP in the Gulf a couple of years ago. And that's, it's one of the unfortunate realities of that business. Yeah, no question about it. What was it? I guess down in Washington, Chesapeake had a fire on a drilling rig a couple of years ago that was real bad. I think 2 people were killed in that fire, and it was a case there too. To speak from the community perspective, and this was kind of an issue, of kind of putting the cart before the horse. You had a fire department down there that wasn't prepared to respond to a natural gas fire. So you have fire departments, and you really think about rural areas, not only rural areas, but just the suburbs of Pittsburgh, the suburbs of Philadelphia. Most fire departments are volunteer fire departments. So that's not the same as kind of getting your municipality's fire department up to speed through training. Volunteers are kind of being, there's certain requirements. My son's a volunteer firefighter. There's certain things they have to do each year, but I know he just went through a training. It was just all about the difference between, extinguishing a natural gas fire because of the pressure and things that, the pipelines and whatnot, capping off those pipelines, dulling that pressure prior to even fighting that fire. So people have to be prepared to respond to that. And really, it's a whole other piece of this industry that we could talk about. It's just the safety teams that are on site and those that are in the community that contribute to this process, because the reality is, it's just there's no way to extract a resource from the earth, whether it's coal or gas or oil, without the dangers of that business. So,
thank you.
You're welcome. So drilling phase, seeing a lot of work going on here. And again, from a geology perspective, from some of the water management side, certainly the environmental technicians, the encasing of those logs. When we talk about occupations that are designed to be environmentally friendly during this phase, it's certainly not the construction folks that are doing that drilling process. It's those workers that are trying to protect the integrity of the environment during that drilling process, whether it be protecting the integrity of the water supply or the land, or the safety of the individuals that are working on that crew. Leads me to final phase, what we call the production phase. This is when all the work has been done. This is where we see kind of that land reclamation process start to kick in. So we see folks on this end that are environmental specialists, civil engineers, landscapers, landscape architects, people that come in and they're kind of building that picture that I showed you earlier of the 1 to 2 car garage surrounded by kind of the green space and the replanted trees and things there. You still see kind of this ongoing monitoring of the site from an environmental perspective, you know, any hazmat type material that might still be there in the dirt, in the earth, is cleaned up at this stage of the game. So, and the well itself is producing at this stage of the game. It's starting to produce the resource. So again, just kind of a list of occupations that I have here: operators, heavy equipment operators, environmental specialists, landscapers, CDL drivers from kind of phase 1 on through and at various levels. Then you start to see some IT people and folks that begin to monitor not only the well site, but the area around that well site as well. Then a lot of the data entry and support people that are monitoring from a distance the production of that well play into this as well at this point in time. So the production phase, the well's producing, the land's being put back together, everything's being cleaned up, and that's kind of wrapping phase 3 for that employment. So I think through all of it, you know, what we're talking about jobs. You know, we're here to talk about careers, and we're talking about what type of jobs are required for this. One thing that's interesting about this industry, about 75 to 80% of the occupations in this industry require a high school diploma or some vocational training. They don't necessarily require 4 years, 6 years, 8 years of college. When you talk about those occupations that would require college degrees, you've heard me mention engineers, you've heard me mention things like the attorneys that work on these projects, maybe in some cases x-ray technicians and folks that are kind of examining that are going to work on this project. There's some room for paralegals, but most of what we see will be occupations that require vocational skill. Heavy equipment operators and CDL drivers are a huge part of the industry. They make about 33% of those individuals that are working on a well site or on a post-well site. General laborers make up about 25% of the occupations that are involved here. General laborers would include what we call environmental technicians. Again, I mentioned a company called Weavertown locally. There's a big one in the state that's called Sunpro. They're doing the land reclamation. They're responding to any of the environmental issues that take place during the drilling process or the extraction of that gas. So let's again just kind of going back to this conversation about the dangers of the industry. If there is an accident or a spill or there's some kind of hazardous material spill, you have environmental companies that are coming in, responding to those and cleaning up. So that general labor category is made up largely of folks that are working as environmental technicians. Environmental technician is kind of the job title for general laborers in this particular industry. So the makeup of it is different, I think, from a training and education perspective. Again, you know, from a financial perspective, there are a lot of people making a lot of money. They're working long hours, but you know, I know guys with a CDL license that are out working in this industry that are making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year for some of these crews, as opposed to, you know, the $35,000, $40,000 a year they were making a couple of years ago, working for a transportation company or a produce company or something, moving goods across the state. So it is kind of a unique opportunity, specifically for somebody who's maybe on a vocational track, that likes working outdoors, likes working in the earth, is interested in traditional construction related trade, or a welder or electrician, something of that nature, can do quite well in this industry. Most frequent job openings, I've got the list. It's for drilling contractors, service companies, truck drivers, operators, equipment operators, what they call rig hands and roustabouts. For oil and gas producers, geologists, engineers, I mentioned landmen earlier, surveyors, and then production workers. There's, again, to kind of go to that third phase of this, there's a position that's called well tenders. And well tenders essentially go out and they monitor the production of those wells with a little handheld computer, plugs into the well, downloads the data regarding how that well is producing, and that data is then taken back to a mainframe, downloaded for the administrative staff to kind of analyze, so on and so on. But those drivers, equipment operators, drillers, rig hands, geologists, engineers, landmen, and production workers, specifically the well tenders, are kind of the top job openings that somebody would look at in this particular industry. I have some stuff here on employer expectation in the industry. Might speak a little bit to the education and training requirements and safety requirements. But before I do that, any other questions coming in? Anything related?
Covered everything.
Okay,
It's
how?
gotten to this point.
Okay, and we're good on time?
Yep.
All right. Employer expectations. This is just from a case study of one company in this industry out of Meadville, PA. It's a company called Universal Well Services. They provide the cement casings that go around the wells to protect the water supply. So, in their business, because safety is such an issue, one of the main components is good literacy skills, people that, can pass and uphold Department of Transportation standards in driving their trucks, keep and maintain specific and accurate Department of Transportation logs. Every truck driver has to keep a log of how many hours they are on the road, how many hours they've spent on a rig, that sort of thing. So fluency in English is huge, but high school education, GED equivalent, is typically the education level for somebody starting in this industry. Because again, you're talking about developing a vocational skill, either as a laborer or potentially an equipment operator or CDL driver. So Universal Well being one example, dozens. But everybody that goes through Universal Well training program, before they can go out to a site, as I mentioned a few moments ago, has to go through a Safe Land USA certification. There's a whole safety process involved. They go through training related to pressures and forces of like backflow and pressures and force of gas lines. They go through safe driver training, fire safety training as well. So even though these folks are going out and they're providing a cement casing to the well site, they still have to go through that safety training related to fire, related to the pressure forces of these well lines, just to have it at a minimum a general understanding of what's going to take place on that well site. Even though they're not drilling, they're providing a very specific service to the company. And I say that to say that I think that's pretty standard for this industry in general, that regardless of what service a worker's providing on that well site, they're going through this type of training to understand the industry, to understand some of the safety requirements involved, so on and so on and so on. A couple of other things. Universal Well is a good example of a company that spends a lot of time just kind of training people on the work structure and the culture of the business. They hire a lot of CDL drivers, as you can imagine, because they're driving cement trucks out to these sites and then they're pumping cement into those sites. So their drivers are pretty typical of drivers in this industry. So somebody has a CDL license, they're not only going to be driving a vehicle, they're going to be operating that vehicle at a site, whether it's doing water extraction to take back to a cleaning facility or pumping cement into a well site to protect the water supply. So just kind of understanding an understanding of the trucks and equipment is always part of the training process. Understanding the hours of operations and the climates that these drivers and operators are working in. One of the things that's unique about this business is it doesn't stop because of weather. If it's storming one day, the roofer's not going to go out and hang shingles on a new roof in the middle of a storm or in the middle of a snowstorm. This business goes 24/7, regardless of what's going on in the weather. So again, you're talking about West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio. The summers are extreme heat and the winters are extreme cold. And these folks are out working in that on a day-to-day basis. So just kind of an exposure to that whole climate issue is critical, not only for CDL and equipment operators, but again, for anybody that's going to work in this business. There are some specifics for a company like this that a worker could expect to have to go through hazmat training, what they call tanker endorsement, which is an endorsement that goes along with the commercial driver's license to transport specific types of materials. Good driving records are always going to be expected in this. People that are looking to get work for a company like this or one of the service companies in this industry are usually folks that are targeting a technical school, schools, and again, in the Pittsburgh area, like Allstate Career School or Pittsburgh Institute of Aeronautics, that are training people in the areas of equipment operation and truck driving. lot of electronics, those folks. Huge things to consider for somebody who is thinking about a career in this industry. First and foremost, keeping a driving record clean. A single DUI, a single moving violation of any sort can easily disqualify somebody from working in this industry because, again, the equipment's big, it's quick, it's dangerous. So, safe driving record is going to be required for all the producers, all the service companies. Insurance companies are a lot of times not even going to look at a worker who doesn't have a clean driving record. So messing up a driver's license would automatically disqualify somebody from this industry. Keeping a criminal background clean. Anybody with a felony conviction is not getting onto a well site. So, staying out of trouble, keeping that background clean is critical as well. Everybody's got to pass a drug test, subjected to random drug testing on an ongoing basis, in addition to the other things that we just spoke of. So drug screenings, physicals, regular hearing test requirements, which again is kind of a tricky thing in this industry because it's a loud construction environment. But again, just being able to kind of hear your teammates on that rig is critical. To be able to follow those instructions is critical. So ongoing hearing tests for individuals on the sites is typically required as well. So, yes,
More questions
please.
just to fit in before we finish. First of all, I know this is fairly new to the region.
Oh, yeah.
See Marcellus Shale coming into western Pennsylvania and setting up. Once they set up a site like that, about how long is that site maintained and functioning before it closes down? And long term, if you're interested in a career like this, would you say there's going to be steady work into the future, or is this something where you're kind of contracted for a few years and then
Yeah, that's a great question.
move on?
Yeah. The life of the individual well site, I'm really not certain of how long that well site produces, and then honestly, what happens to that well site after it stops producing. The resource itself, the industry projects that they'll be extracting Marcellus shale gas from anywhere from 50 to 75 years. They have a second layer of this shale that's discovered now called a Utica shale, produces more of what they call wet gas. They anticipate extracting natural gas from the Utica shale for 100 years or more. So the industry is not going anywhere. And as we were just discussing a moment ago, I mean, there are several different debates about this industry. It is a political hot button. But the reality is it's not going anywhere. And in many regards, it's driving the economy right now in Southwest PA, Southeast Ohio, certainly in the Panhandle and Northern West Virginia. The banking industry is booming around it. Anybody from this part of town has seen a whole new city develop out of South Point, PA, where the producers and all their contractors are kind of moving into one location. It's certainly affecting, it's changing education in the region. Penn State's kind of a leader in developing new talent for the shale industry. Almost every I think every community college right now in Western PA, from Westmoreland, the Community College Allegheny County, they're part of an affiliation called ShaleNet. It's just millions of dollars that the Department of Labor is pumping into a training program every year solely for the purpose of preparing workers for this industry. I think one of the things that happened to energy producers is when the discovery was made that via Marcellus shale we could extract natural gas. I think there was assumption about our area or region that we were kind of steel town and blue collar workers would be ready to go right to work on this region. That wasn't the case at all. They kind of set up shop at a time where we were going through a generational change where maybe our fathers were steel workers, but those in our 20s, 30s, 40 somethings were not. So the energy companies and their contractors have had a real difficult time finding and retaining talent in this region. Again, I talk about the South Point area. If you drive through South Point, you see nothing but license plates from Oklahoma and Louisiana and Texas, because there's still kind of this ongoing need to import workers into the region. KDK did a kind of a unique piece on that whole process, because that's been kind of a complaint of local elected officials and local residents saying, hey, wait a minute, why are all these people from Oklahoma coming here to work and we could be taking these jobs? Well, the reality is they're prepared to do the jobs, and our region isn't. So the education system is trying to catch up with that. And I always say, kind of jokingly talk about, if you've seen the movie Armageddon with Bruce Willis and his crew that are out there on this gas rig, they wouldn't just hire anybody to go out there in that rig and work with Bruce Willis and his crew. I mean, this is really, it's almost an industry that you have to grow up in, and it's a cultural kind of thing. And it's going to take a while, I think, for our region's workforce to catch up with the needs of this industry. So we're going to still see people coming in, but the KD piece focused on specifically the number of people that were purchasing homes and, setting up, relocating to Western PA, that sort of thing, and just some of the economic benefits it's had in terms of attracting talent to the region, because we've gone through a long period where we've been losing talent to other regions. So I think all that to say, we're really seeing, our region's economy form around the natural gas industry. And we could debate it, we could like it, dislike it, and so on and so on. But the reality is it's not going anywhere. You're talking about, multi-trillion-dollar industry that's going to be here to stay probably for the next 100 years.
Like you said, there's definitely money to be made there.
No,
It's
no
hard
question.
work. I can think of at least 5 people I know since high school that I grew up with that are working in that field now. And they might be gone 10 days at a time
Yes.
from home, but for that might not have a full college degree, they're making very good money.
Right.
So the money is there to be made.
I tell you, I met a kid a couple of years ago, 27 years old, never really had a steady job his entire life, his entire adult life. A couple, maybe some retail stuff here and customer service, just bounced one thing to another. And he went and he earned his CDL license. I think it was at Allstate Career School, one of the local training providers, and almost instantly was picked up by a fracking company over in Carnegie, PA. I ran into him. He lives here in the East End. He's running a small place. He's single, and he's making about $80,000 to $90,000 a year. And he kind of just laughs about it. He's 29 now, and he's living in a small one-bedroom apartment because he's not home. As you mentioned, he's on the road almost all the time. He's just banking all that money, And he told me one day, he said, by 40, he said, I'll buy a house. He said, I'll have this money in the bank and maybe go do something else. He said, I don't have to do this the rest of my life. And, so it is kind of it's a unique opportunity. It's a unique industry. Our region has never seen anything like it, probably since the establishment of the steel mills long ago. So,
Thank you.
welcome. Any others?
That's it.
A couple of resources, I think, if you want to learn more information, some more detail on some of these job titles and things. The Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association has set up a website. It's pioga.org, PIOGA.org. They have an entire career center on there. The Marcellus Shale Coalition as well, which is an advocate for the industry. They've also set up a career center, and they've done a nice job of connecting almost every company that has some relationship to the shale industry, everything from banking and legal services, so on and so on, through production companies and contractors. They've kind of put all into one place. So you can really go to the Marcellus Shale Coalition's website and explore not only the career videos and the career areas, but each individual company that's producing some of those opportunities. So hopefully those resources will be useful to you and follow up, and hopefully you've taken something from the session. So, all right.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much,
guys.
Joe. Okay, so we
Appreciate it.
appreciate you coming in, especially the gift department, and great job for the last 2 sessions. We appreciate you coming in.
Glad to be here. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.